Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.
Hello and welcome to Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling. I'm Anthony Sitko.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
This is issue number 87, and I know you're all wondering who the character is. We've been sort of building this up for a couple of weeks now. Ariel, our present level patron, who is known for covering basically the entire Bat family. She's working her way through with her monthly picks. This is a big one, and it's kind of out of left field for her. We're going to be covering The Man Without Fear, Daredevil, proving that Ariel does, in fact, read Marvel comics.
Hooray!
She doesn't just read DC and the Bat Family books. This is a big character, and the fact that we're 87 episodes in and we haven't gotten to someone like Matt Murdock yet, I think speaks to just the breadth and the depth of the characters that we've covered on this show. So very much looking forward to this one. A couple things before we get started. First off, we have a new mayor level patron, Wall, from Canada. So another international patron. We've had two over the last couple of weeks now.
Yeah.
It's inspiring and awesome to know that we're reaching outside of the U.S. and that folks are listening to podcasts all over the world.
It's amazing.
And that we are getting support from our listeners all over the world. So the UK, Canada, Australia, elsewhere, it's absolutely fantastic. And Wall is a comic book artist. So we'll definitely be plugging some of his stuff as we move on. Also, as a result of that, we are now over $75 a month in our Patreon, which is also just
mind-blowing.
It's absolutely mind-blowing. And so once again, thank you to every single one of our patrons for your continued support for the show. But since we are now over $75 a month, we will now be doing 2 trade paperback reviews per month. And that will be exclusive, again, to all of our patrons. So if you want to hear some of the trade paperback reviews that we've already done, and the next one we'll be covering is The Boys, Volume 1. You can go to patreon.com/Capes on the Couch, and you can subscribe for as little as $1 a month. Continue to support the show. Give us a cool, you'll receive a shout out and help us continue to grow the show. Last, our plug, I think we skipped last week, but our podcast shout out this week is Verbal Diorama. Lovely M from the UK. She covers movies, and she just has I like the way that she talks about them. It's very fun. She goes into some of the trivia and the making of, but really it talks more about the emotional impact that the films have on her, and whether they're entertaining, whether they're comedies, whether they're dramas, horror, whatever the case may be. It's always entertaining. She's a delight. And if I may, I think she's got just a fun voice to listen to. She's just, I like her accent. So you can check her out at verbaldiorama.com. So shout out to M over there across the pond. So Daredevil, Matt Murdock, the man without fear, the sightless swashbuckler, the guardian of Hell's Kitchen. So many names, so many sobriquets that the character has gone through, and so many writers and so many amazing storylines. So as always, we will do our best to sort of condense the background. So Daredevil, created by the legendary Stan Lee and Bill Everett. In Daredevil #1, April 1964, Matt Murdock was a young kid when he was blinded by chemicals that were spilled from a truck. Although he ended up blind, the rest of his senses became heightened, and he used these abilities to learn how to fight and become a hero. So early on, he temporarily created a separate identity, Mike Murdock, who was his twin brother, to throw people off the Daredevil identity because it was accidentally outed by his good friend Spider-Man. But that ended up getting dropped early on. And then so early on in the 60s, A lot of the storylines focused on Matt just trying to keep his identity secret from those around him, although he did confide in his girlfriend Karen Page early on, but the strain became too much and they ended up breaking up. In the early 70s, he moved to San Francisco and began dating Black Widow for a period. In fact, the book was known as Daredevil and Black Widow for a couple of years. And then in the late 70s, the stories had sort of a horror focus. And then the name that I think has probably become most identified with Daredevil as a character, Frank Miller, took over art in 1979 and then writing in 1980 or 1981. And really, it's very interesting. Very few characters you can do this with, where you can draw a line, a clear defining line over their characterization and everything that makes them a particular character. There is Daredevil before Frank Miller, and then there's Daredevil after Frank Miller, because his run on the character was so iconic and so instrumental in changing so many things about Daredevil as a character, his background, his supporting cast, and just the character in and of himself. He focused on Catholic guilt. He focused on an abusive background. Jack Murdock, prior to Frank Miller, was a good dad.
Yeah.
He was a good father who cared about Matt, who tried to make Matt into a good person. Frank Miller said no. Jack Murdock was an alcoholic. He was abusive. He was just a real trash bag of a human being. And that has colored Matt in the 40 years since then, that everything is looked to and worked off of that Frank Miller storyline. He made Kingpin, who was previously a Spider-Man character. He made Kingpin the new nemesis, so much so now that you think Kingpin, I dare say the overwhelming majority of us think Daredevil and not Spider-Man, unless you're into Ultimate Spider-Man. They brought back Brian Michael Bendis, did make Ultimate Kingpin a major nemesis for Ultimate Spider-Man. But by and large, in the 616 universe, Kingpin is largely a Daredevil character at this point, and it is in no small part due to Frank Miller's influence. Ann Nocenti then took over, and she created Typhoid Mary, who we did an episode on way back when. That was an early episode.
Yep.
And she brought him to upstate New York outside of an urban environment. So that was a little bit of a scenery change for him. And then in the late 90s, he joined the Marvel Knights with, I believe, Luke Cage. Moon Knight was in there, Punisher, the Joe Quesada run on that, very dark, street level characters. In the early 2000s, Brian Michael Bendis and the David Mack run, that was very critically acclaimed. He marries Mila Donovan and his identity becomes public once again. And it's later retconned by the Purple Children. And we referenced that in the Purple Man episode, another one of his recurring rogues gallery. And then in the early 2010s, you've got the Shadowland event. And I did speak briefly on Shadowland in the Moon Knight episode. Shadowland as an event is not that bad. It's basically Matt gets corrupted by an evil hand demon and then takes over the hand and kills Bullseye and becomes absolutely corrupt. The event itself is pretty good. The Moon Knight sub-series, miniseries associated with it is utter garbage. So stick to the mainline event and forget everything in the Moon Knight sub-story, because it literally has no bearing on the rest of the plot. So then after that, you've got Mark Waid's run, which is slightly lighter in tone than some of the previous stories. And it sort of brings him back to the earlier, more fun, swashbuckling type stories. And then Charles Soule, an attorney who we have spoken about many, many times on this show. Charles Soule really leans in heavily into the legal side of things. And under Charles Soule's writing, Matt becomes an assistant district attorney in New York, which, speaking as a lawyer, going from private practice to the government is very unusual. It almost never happens that way. You start off in the DA's office and then you become a defense attorney. You never go the other way. I think that was also the premise of the show Shark with James Woods back like maybe 10 years ago or so, if anybody remembers that show, or it was just me. Yeah, he was a defense attorney who then said, "No, I'm going to become a prosecutor now because I know all the tips and tricks, and I'm going to be a good prosecutor." So, very same idea. And in addition to becoming an ADA, then he becomes deputy mayor. And who is the mayor of New York? Wilson Fisk.
Oh, that sounds like fun.
Oh yeah, nothing because the notion of a corrupt businessman then deciding he wants to enter politics and taking power for himself is completely unheard of in this day and age.
Do you feel that? Do you feel that the flames just starting to engulf us now? Oh man.
Yeah, that's a bit of a hot take, but anyway. And so right now, Chip Zdarsky is writing the series, and he's sort of taking it back to that darker stuff, but not. So that's following up on the death of Daredevil storyline, which was absolutely fantastic. So again, that's trying to summarize Daredevil in like 5 or 6 minutes. Did the best I could. So the issues, of which there are a plethora, or as Dan would say, a plethora. It's an inside joke there. So trying to pick 3 issues for Matt is kind of interesting. But let's start with the depression. And again, this is based out of the Miller run. He's the son of an abusive father. Jack was an alcoholic, frequently hit Matt, which as a boxer, he knew how to do.
Which, by the way, is its own crime in and of itself. If you're a trained professional fighter of any sort and you are licensed in a state, then that's above and beyond just randomly attacking someone and potentially getting caught by the police. Just a heads up for people.
Duly noted. So that depression, I think, weighs on him just in general. He's got just an overall, I would say, general depression as a result of everything he's seen. I mean, again, just running down the gamut. He was, subjected to the accident. We didn't even really touch on the fact that his mother was missing and then came back into his life. His mother, Maggie, then became a nun after she sort of just left.
Yeah.
And that was done very well, I think, in the Netflix series, which, again, really, I think it just adapts so much of the Frank Miller stories, I think, very well. Well, I'll say seasons 1 and 3. And this is a bit of a hot take. I did not care for season 2 at all. I thought the stuff with the Punisher was absolutely fantastic, but the entire Elektra storyline from season 2 sucked. It completely took me out of the story. I couldn't care. I could not care less about what happened to anything involving Elektra, but I digress. Back to the depression. Matt is depressed, but has a reason to be depressed, or at least it's understandable and justifiable why he has that depression, but it still impacts him. And we do see it time to time, depending on the writer. So Doc, if you will, I don't think we've touched on general depression on a character in a while. So
yeah, absolutely. So typical things that we see in depression, just to give like a brief refresher, because most people, when you say the word depression, you just think of the mood, but it impacts you mind, body, and soul. So we're talking about things like sleep. We're talking about appetite. For both of those, either increased or decreased. The point is, it's not what you're used to. Whether or not you have the interest or the energy to do the things that you want to, be it other people's expectations or your own. The idea that your sense of self-worth, it usually gets crushed. And in this case, it's an external focus, which doesn't always happen. It can completely come from the person themselves. But when you have a person that's supposed to be a support for you and supposed to give you instructions on how to live your life, and that person treats you like garbage, then unfortunately, there is a very high chance that you're going to take that lesson to heart. In other words, if you hear enough times that you're no good or you're worthless or something is wrong, then you may start to believe it because that person is supposed to be giving you proper feedback. Parents are supposed to be instructional. And yet, in this circumstance, it's destructive, clearly. So even at a time, let's say something bad happens, and I know this is not timeline correct. I'm just giving it as an example for all of us in our lives. If you have a negative or tragic event happen to you and you need someone to talk to, and the person that you go to basically, instead of just giving you the most instinctual support, a hug, just something to provide a level of comfort, and instead it's, yeah, that's pretty bad, man, and there's nothing you could do about it. That level of indifference can be painful. Or variation, yeah, man, well, what did you do to deserve it? Now that's just outright piercing. Or, hey, man, you think you got problems? Why don't you try coming home from work after working 50 hours? In other words, just trying to wallow in misery, loving company. So many variations of this that happen in people's lives. And when you don't have something to fall back on one hand, there is in comics or in other drama, you can have the possibility that which does not kill you makes you stronger. But the more common reality is that which does not kill you leaves you much more vulnerable. And so from that standpoint, especially at a young age, with no other ways to observe the positivity, because his father, as you mentioned, is not only doing that in the home, but he's grown up in Hell's Kitchen. And I'm not trying to knock Hell's Kitchen. There are plenty of wonderful people that have lived in that environment, or anyone that's come from a rough neighborhood. So be it. I'm not knocking that per se. I'm just saying that makes it a little less likely that you're going to have the immediate resources available to you to address these things at a young age. So you end up carrying it through to adulthood. And so whatever, no offense, messed up mechanisms, coping skills that you've managed to piece together without anybody giving the proper guidance, whatever you came up with that allowed you to survive to an adult age, you're probably just going to carry through unless somebody else intervenes. And guess what? Pretty commonly, you just end up continuing the pattern that was brought about by your parents. Thankfully, that doesn't happen with Matt. He does actually have, in part, in a weird way due to the accident, he does have other ways that he can manage his life, and it doesn't all completely fall apart for him. But it's clear that with multiple encounters with different characters, that this still weighs heavily on him. And he doesn't, there's no such thing as quote unquote letting it go. It's something that's a part of you. It's something that's ingrained in you. And there's no such thing as just exercising it out and just absolving yourself. It's not that he did anything wrong per se, but because people usually try and relate things to family or how important that is, and it's tough to say. I don't want to talk about my dad. I don't have your experience, so it's difficult to even make that connection with other people. So it's just this permanent scar, this permanent, I don't know what you want to call it, scarlet letter, just something that is just indelible on him, and it makes depression that much more difficult to fight.
Yeah, very, very well said. And I think that it's difficult for me to say, because I think that there's this notion of depression looks a certain way to people, and it's not. It's not a monolith. There is no single way that depression manifests itself so much that you can say that is clearly depression and that is clearly not depression. I think for each individual person, it's going to manifest differently. And that makes it difficult to acknowledge, that makes it difficult to identify, and that makes it difficult to talk about, because there is, again, going back to this Hollywoodized notion of depression that you just walk around, I'm sad. No, everything is terrible.
Don't worry. Don't worry. We'll get to that at some point.
Okay. Well, I was going to, no, I know we will, but my point is just that I think because people think that's depression, that anything that isn't that very narrow scope focus clearly can't be depression. And then you end up with folks saying, well, you could, just smile. That's, because that's going to help you get through it. You know how many people are depressed smile? You know how many people are depressed do fun things, go out and do fun stuff? And it's a mask. Yeah. It's absolutely a mask. And I say this as someone who has coped with depression on and off for many, many years. There are times when I want to be happy. I think if I do something, it will make me happy, but it doesn't work out that way. And so again, I'm glad that this is one of the issues that we're covering for this character, because I think sometimes people, and I'm not singling out anybody, obviously I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but I think sometimes people need a reminder that mental health is tricky to identify, but we need to be open and honest about it. And again, it always brings us back to that notion of why are we doing the show? To destigmatize it. And if we start to talk about the various and many, many different ways that depression can manifest itself, that maybe somebody listening goes, yeah, you know what? That sounds like my version of depression.
Yeah.
Maybe I need to talk to somebody. Maybe I need to get some help. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's definitely thank you, for your description. And I know I certainly, at least historically on this show and on the website and everything, I've spoken about my story. But again, my story is not the only one. My version of depression is not the only one. Millions of people deal with it. Millions of people have their own version. My version or Matt Murdock's version does not invalidate anybody else's. Yours is just as valid and is just as worthy of concern and getting help. So if you feel that you are struggling with this stuff, or if you feel like anything we've said touches on something that personally impacts you, we say it all the time. We say it at the beginning and end of every episode. Talk to a mental health professional. Get some help. So moving then to issue number 2. And again, this is something that was really established under Frank Miller and is sort of in his own Frank Miller-esque way beats the reader over the head with Catholic guilt. As a lapsed Catholic myself, who has walked my own path with religion and faith, I definitely understand the notions of just being brought up in a house. See, I wouldn't say that, because my house really wasn't that religious, but I do understand the notion of Catholic guilt. And for Matt, it's the Irish Catholic guilt. I'm Italian, so we have it's a slightly different flavor of Catholic guilt, but it is still there. And I'm sure many, many listeners may know it by Jewish guilt, or just,
thank you,
another flavor of guilt.
Right. I was going to say, I think it's much more structural religious guilt.
Yes, I was going to say it's about religion, big R, and the church.
Yeah.
Big C, church. Yeah. Whatever religious form that takes.
Right.
Yeah. So we're going in all in on the hot takes here for this episode. So let's talk about how religion can mess you up.
Oh, man. Well, thank you so much for the clickbait. So I'm going to start just immediately diffusing that and pointing out that I think spirituality, faith, and having a sense of a higher power can be absolutely amazing things. And even religion itself can be highly constructive for people. Having said that, there is a certain aspect of many organized religions that lead to a notion that I'm going to admit I'm going to talk about from a Christian background, because although I'm not Catholic, I was raised Baptist, but I went to Catholic school for many years, so I understand that aspect of it as well. And I don't pretend to be a theologist. I don't know every theory and all of the minutiae, so please, you can save some of the hate mail, whatever we get. But the idea that as humans, we are not just fallible, but as humans, we are basic sinners. And the idea that you always need something above and beyond yourself to fix everything. And if you're not doing that, then you are not just wrong. And some people may think what I'm about to say is too strong, but I've listened to the sermons. I've been to the homilies. I hear this, where if you're not following that certain path, you're pretty much ostracized. You're outright evil, and you're always welcomed back. It's not it's not a closed door, as the minister that I know, the doors of the church are always open. So I don't want to make it sound like it's malicious, but what becomes indoctrinated is that if you are not following the teachings, depending on how strict the church or the household is, you are not going to be considered totally a part of the family, totally a part of the group. And in addition to that, every action that you take, everything that you do, it's almost as if Sting is singing to you. I'll be watching you. And not everybody reacts to that well. I don't think that's a stretch to say, because in general, we all want to consider ourselves to be good people. We want to think that we're, if not doing good in the world, at least not doing much harm in the world. And the idea that we're starting off from a completely different base, that no. Unless you have certain interventions, you are going to naturally be doing things wrong. And you're going to be reminded of it on a regular basis. And you're going to have many people around you that are going to be judging you. It's not just a higher power judging you. It's your peers. It's everyone that's affiliated within that organization. They really are going to be judging you. They may not say they are. It may just be small comments here and there, or even your perception of what they may be thinking, even if they're not thinking of you. This is how pervasive that type of indoctrination can be. And so even the most basic things, such as when was the last time you went to church, instead of it becoming what should be a productive, introspective moment where you want to determine what role faith takes in your life, it becomes an idea of, well, if I don't do this, then I'm going to hell, and I can't believe that I'm this horrible human being that is somehow still trying to raise a family. We come to such irrational conclusions from that type of structured beatdown from a spiritual standpoint that it becomes counterproductive. I'm sorry. I shouldn't say counterproductive. I'm pretty sure the coffers of the church are well lined because of it. I went there. I think for centuries, when it comes to these things, that a lot of it has to do with the idea that without our outside guidance, your life is going to be less than worthwhile. And that's a dangerous message to send. I would like to say that I've been privileged. That has not been my experience. I have had a positive church-going experience in multiple religions. I enjoy the fact that I've been able to go to different sessions in different religious groups, and I've always considered them to be a positive experience. So I'm not speaking totally ill of each religion. I'm just pointing out that that is the potential dark side to it. And when it gets that pervasive, I think a lot of people are going to understand what I'm about to say. Forget depression. It produces this unending anxiety. You are always wondering if what you're doing for your family or what decisions you're making, be it your job, be it just even what you're eating, are these the right decisions for me? Or am I going to be eternally punished for it? And having that type of sword of Damocles hanging over your head at all times doesn't always produce positive results. This may be one of the most controversial topics that I've spoken about personally. And once again, I know I'm giving disclaimer after disclaimer because I consider myself a man of faith. I'm not going to deny that. But at the same time, I'll admit that there are parts of organizations that I make sure I keep certain distance. And unfortunately, even that gets criticized. Everybody that's heard the term cafeteria Catholic, don't ever be a cafeteria Catholic. You can't pick and choose the things that work for you in life. But that's literally what life is. It's making sure that the parts that actually work for you and make you a better person, you continue to focus on, while the parts that actually make you a potentially vindictive, anxious wreck, you tend to steer clear of. That's by definition what we as humans are supposed to be doing. So I appreciate the fact that someone like Daredevil has the structure and the base of organized religion to make sure that he was put on a positive path. But I'm sorry, it's going to have branches. And if people can't accept that, then they have way more things to work out.
Well, that was certainly a lot more coherent and tactful than anything I would have said. As I say, I have walked my own path with religion and faith. I've mentioned it briefly on this show. And I think I talked to some extent about it with Kate from Ignorance Was Bliss when I was on that show. When I was her guest, we spoke about my history with religion and my path to my current state of belief and faith, whatever that may be. And I think for me and for what I think are a lot of people these days, it comes down to the idea of faith in something bigger, but not the structured, dogmatic way in which the church, big C, and again, whether that's Catholicism, some version of Presbyterian, Judaism, Islam, whatever the church comes at you with, you're not fond of the way that it's presented. And I think that's certainly maybe true for Matt. And I think that's true for a lot of folks that, as I said in Dogma, I don't have faith, I have a good idea, that it comes down to belief in something, belief in your fellow humans, and belief that there is something out there, but maybe not necessarily the go to this building for an hour and a half once a week, pay, when they pass the collection plate around, et cetera, et cetera. So the last thing that I want to talk about is, and when we were discussing which of the myriad issues to discuss, Doc, you said your exact words were, don't overthink it. The fact that Matt is blind. And just want to go on record right off the bat saying that is not an issue in and of itself. And there's certainly nothing wrong with visual impairment, etc. But the way that Matt has to handle this, because let's face facts here, Matt may not be able to see with his eyes, but because of the rest of his heightened senses, he is still acutely aware of everything that goes on around him. But he can't say that. And so he has to play the role of a blind man in a society which, again, let's be fair, let's be frank here, ADA requirements are what they are. And there is a lot of legislation over making sure that there are accessibilities for folks with particular disabilities. But we do still live in a very visual world. And Matt doesn't have the ability to perceive everything. And again, having to play a blind man and having to play up the notion, especially as Matt Murdock, Daredevil being what it is, but Matt Murdock can't let on that he can still hear things. He's got basically echolocation. He can't pick up that he can smell things. He can't announce that he has the rest of his heightened senses. And so that takes a toll. The fact that he has to, again, play up the disability, that is hard on somebody. And as two able-bodied individuals, it's certainly a little difficult for us to speak on that experience. But Doc, if you could just maybe focus in on what the toll is that takes of having to fake it. I mean, he does have the disability. I'm not saying that he doesn't, but having to fake everything else because you can't let on that you have all these other heightened senses.
This comes down to the idea of inclusion. So first, I want to acknowledge that many of the things that you mentioned in terms of accommodations for certain disabilities is still a relatively new thing in humanity's entire existence. For the longest time, the idea that you were blind, it just was automatic that you were near illiterate because it was determined that you can't read because there was no way for anyone to communicate with you until Braille came out. And in addition to that, if you were considered blind and there was no way for you to consider navigation other than having someone assist you, then you were given a stick and said, okay, you make it work. And there was pretty much the idea that you were going to have less of a life because of it. And that was never fair. I'm sorry that it happened. It's a terrible situation, but I'm glad that there have been improvements made. So to get that out of the way, I'm not trying to minimize anything that I just said, but the idea that someone, even with a disability, whatever it is able to have compensation with other parts of their either physical nature or their mental capabilities or through communication and appropriate supports, that's all the proper way to go about things. And Matt does a fantastic job doing that. But there's a certain, this is one of those that gets a little spicy in terms of how I'm going to say it. There's a certain expectation where for any human being, if you need help with something, you ask for it. And if you're not asking for it, then it's just automatically assumed that, okay, then you've got it. You have everything totally under control. Matt has had instances where even with his heightened senses, it's worked against him. The idea, though, that it's not as if until he really learns and understands what it is that he's going through, he can fully process everything that comes his way in terms of that echolocation, in terms of those other heightened senses. It's, in a strange way, a bit of sensory overload even. And there are many people, we don't have to go to comics for this, there are many people that do have certain problems with sensory perception where it's heightened to the point that it's disturbing with certain sounds, or people that have sensitivities to certain wavelengths of light. And many people actually have developed, I shouldn't say many, but there are a few people that have actually worsened their conditions by purposely ignoring the fact that they have a slight problem in that particular sensory area. In other words, I swear to you, I'm not making this up. I've had patients that pointed out they got so frustrated by the fact that they had a slight hearing loss that they would purposely go to concerts as loud as they could. They would blast their headphones as loud as they could just so that they could finally completely go deaf, because people could understand that way more than does this person that's an annoying jerk that they have to talk a little louder to them. That's how frustrated they were with just being slightly different. I'm not talking about whether or not it's a complete disability. I'm not talking about whether or not they were compensating in other ways. Just the fact that things were a little off and they didn't necessarily always want to constantly, no matter what, have to discuss this in every encounter that they will have for the rest of their lives. They much rather just have it completely gone. There are people that have had hearing aids that were implanted, cochlear implants, that actually said the best part of their day is when they can remove them so that they are completely deaf, because that experience is better than some of the frequencies that the cochlear implant causes that are too sensitive. Some people that have LASIK surgery to correct their vision can't stand the glare from certain lights, and they wish they didn't have the surgery to begin with because it's just that distracting, because they're in an office environment that's nothing but fluorescence, and it makes their work almost impossible to do. So this idea of what's a disability versus what's a minor inconvenience versus what people are just willing to push through and ignore completely, it's a wide spectrum. And I know it's not fair for me to say what's right and what's wrong, but just the fact that you have to find what's comfortable for yourself. And sometimes you don't even have the choice. I gave examples where people may have a choice as to how they handle it, but in this case, this was an accident. So someone that, okay, Ray Charles is an example. He was born with sight. He ended up losing it. And he ends up as a musician, and people automatically say, oh, well, you see, he became a musician because he lost his vision. How do we know that? We make these assumptions about what people do, and Daredevil kind of feeds into that as a character. But as you said, our thoughts of what works for a person is much different than what the person themselves is going through. So that disconnect is a gap that I'm not sure we're ever truly bridging. And I think that there are a lot of people out there that are way more polite than we realize when we try to address these issues in reality. I may be totally off base with this, but at least with patients that I've talked to that have certain conditions, I would say it's, I'll estimate in my experience about 7 out of 10 that have pointed out to me, there are some real obvious things that you guys that are considered fully capable are really missing. You're missing the mark and you don't even know it.
Yeah. I think knowing the topic that we were diving into and knowing how sometimes we touch on those types of topics where we're just going to go, all right, we know this is a third rail, but we have to touch it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was about as good of a discussion as we could have hoped for. I have heard about and read, I've not personally experienced, but I have heard about individuals who figure that they'll just go the full extreme for whatever the case may be, that that the full disability is better, quote unquote, than the mild disturbance for whatever reason. I can't begin to fathom that. And that's a whole other separate topic. I think that requires a lengthy discussion not related to comic book characters. So we're going to jump off the third rail and save ourselves from getting further electrocuted. We're going to take a break, plug a couple of shows. When we get back, we'll get into treatment. Stay tuned.
Greetings and salutations. This is Cage's Kiss, the ultimate Cage cast, where we discuss the movies and life of the national treasure, Nick Cage.
There are 3 of us here, and I can't help but notice that none of us are Nicolas Cage. Did nobody call him?
What? A Cage cast with no Nick Cage?
No, instead of being Nicolas Cage, we're 3 Nicolas Cage experts, which is the next best thing.
I don't think we should admit to being experts.
Too late.
We are not experts at anything. We are not life coaches, and we are not in any way, shape, or form qualified to give you suggestions on life choices.
But Nick Cage is, and he's made hundreds of life choices.
Seriously, I cannot stress enough just how much you should not take our advice.
But we're experts.
No, seriously, we're not experts.
Yes, but we will be reviewing his first acting gig as Nicholas Coppola, Best of Times, which features a young and very precious Crispin Glover.
And his work in Fast Times at Ridgemont High.
And his work in My Nightmares.
We're experts.
Hi, this is Jimmy from the podcast Talk Me Into, the show where my co-host Dan, Jeff, and I talk each other, and maybe even you, into liking what we like. Here's a little taste of our show.
I need another episode.
Whoa, my God. I was not expecting this.
It claps too.
It does. It do clap. It's a proper bop.
Jeff and Jimmy, did I talk you into liking spoilers?
No.
If you feel so inclined, you can listen to our show every Tuesday. Find us in every podcasting app and follow us on Twitter at TalkMeInto.
Hi, I'm Erica Schultz, and this is Capes on the Couch, where comics get counseling.
So now that we've fully recovered from the electrocution on the third rail that we gave ourselves, talking about the issues, let's get into treatment. So in universe, first and foremost, what would you say to Matt Murdock?
Given what he's shown to be capable of in terms of his senses, I would make this the ultimate biofeedback opportunity. You want to talk about being attuned with yourself. If he gave himself the chance, I think it would do wonders for him. He could probably get this to the point that he could describe his mood based on his basic vital signs. I think that he could transcend with meditation to a level that's almost rivaling telepaths. That's how critical I think it would be to him to tap into that. He definitely has the intellect for it. He has, I think, the patience and dedication for it. So I would love to guide this guy in that realm. I would just revel in the things that he could explain to me as to what he's processing in his own body, let alone his own mind. So that's pretty short, but really the way I would go.
Yeah, biofeedback. I know that it's something that I've done over the last, about 15 years or so. If I find, again, if I'm struggling with some depression, I will sit and take a moment to listen to my body and say, okay, what am I feeling right now? What is my heart rate? What are my limbs going through? Biofeedback is also very helpful if you are having difficulty trying to fall asleep. But I do encourage our listeners to give biofeedback a try. I think it helps just as a grounding technique in general for awareness and going through your daily life. So Matt would definitely have a field day with going through some biofeedback. I think it may actually throw him for a loop. Side note, that the way the Ben Affleck movie did it, and I know it's a terrible film overall, but the fact that he sleeps in a sensory deprivation chamber, I thought was incredibly well done, and one of the few things I thought that they did very well in that movie. So out of universe,
I mean, you once again, don't really have to overthink it. You got a guy with a history of abuse from his parents. You got, a religious background and upbringing that leads to a certain level of, as you coined it, Catholic guilt. I know you didn't create the term. And in addition to that, may have some sort of disability, that may not be directly related to any of the other things involved. It's just a part of their life. So the first part of the approach is to figure out, okay, what is the actual issue? Meaning, some people truly are depressed about their disability. If that's the case, okay, let's talk about it. If it's no, I'm used to that. It's my relationships or it's my whatever, then okay, never mind. I'm not going to focus as much. I'm not going to ignore it if something comes up just from a practical standpoint, but yeah, I'm not going to dwell on whether or not you can see or hear or whatever. Now, I mean, there has to be some real obvious things. If you can't hear me and I'm talking, then that creates a little bit of a strange dynamic and a much slower process because I don't have sign language, but thankfully we have technology, so that's fine. But to deal with the other things, the Catholic guilt, the depression, and all of that, well, I need to know what their goal is with their faith. And I have to do it in a way that doesn't sound, pardon the pun, like it doesn't sound preachy. If they want to continue to have a strong involvement in their church or in that particular religion, and they want to have a position there, and they actually want to increase their involvement, okay, then the way I have to work with that is there a way that it'll still be fulfilling for you? Because if all you're doing is repeating a pattern of doing more things to appease more people within the church and not for yourself, and doing it because you're trying to avoid a massive punishment, then that's negative reinforcement. And I don't think using negative reinforcement over and over in that sense is going to alleviate your anxiety. I think it's going to amplify it. You're going to get these bursts. It's going to be a weird escalating roller coaster. You're going to get a decrease every time you do more in the church, but then it's going to spike back up probably even higher as you continue to do more things to avoid that original feeling of, oh my God, I don't want to go to hell. And you just, keep ramping up. So it's like, congratulations. You just made yourself the most productive and well-loved, anxious mess of a churchgoer that you've ever seen. And I'm not even exaggerating when I say that. I've had people in the hospital that it's clearly that's what's going on. But heaven forbid I actually say, oh, wow, heaven forbid, sorry, I just threw myself off. So heaven forbid that I say to that person, you need to get involved less in the church. That's not going to work. What may work is you need to find a different way to get involved. You need to find a way that is going to be lasting for you and that creates a stronger interfaith connection with your emotions. That's a line that I use sometimes just to point out that I really am trying to integrate it and I'm not just saying, oh, the church sucks, regardless of what I actually think. In terms of the abuse, the depression, I think we've discussed that before, but I'll say this. The combination, if a person really does have this mix, you have depressive symptoms, you have a history of trauma, you have some anxiety, I think, that's induced by your own expectations, in addition to having a disability, which may or may not create not just physical stress for you, but added emotional stress. I would look at medication there too, and it's bread and butter. I would be looking probably to start with an SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, to help, because in all of those spheres, that medication has been shown to be effective in the long run. If the person is looking for instant relief, well, sorry, barking up the wrong tree. There are medications that can help temporarily, but that's the problem. They're temporary. We're talking about trying to improve your life for the long run. So it can be frustrating in these cases, because especially people that are religiously bent are pointing out, or may have some reluctance saying, is that what the church would want? In which case I usually respond, I've never heard God say, don't use the proper tools if you're a carpenter. So it can be a bit of a hard sell, but even in those instances, I try and give feedback that I have treated people that are religious or have certain faiths, and it has not impacted the faith itself. And thankfully, most patients usually trust me on that, which says a lot, because I'm not trying to compete with a higher power.
Well, that's certainly good that you don't have the delusions of grandeur enough to go, yeah, no, I can compete with God. I think I could do that. So glad to hear that you are not one of the mental health professionals or medical professionals who has a God complex. So good to know that. Thank you for pointing that out 87 episodes in. Should have clarified that in episode 1. No, just kidding. So, all right. I think there's a lot to unpack here, and Matt certainly being a very fascinating character and having many layers. We'll do the best that we can, and we will try to do him justice. But let's see what happens when we get Daredevil, Matt Murdock, on Dr. Issues' couch.
Hello, Matt. I'm Dr. Issues.
Hello, Doctor.
Can I get you anything to help make you comfortable?
No, thank you. I'm good.
Okay, then. So what brings you here today?
Before we get started, how does this work? Is this like a confession where I just start talking, or is it more like a cross-examination where you're asking questions and I answer?
Well, it makes sense that you work under familiar constructs, I guess, but it's not nearly as structured as either of those. Like, consider this more like a general discussion. If I feel the need to probe further, I'll ask questions, but they'll mostly be in response to your statements.
Very well. Then where to begin? Do you want to go with the blindness, the abusive father, the Catholic guilt, the many, many failed relationships?
Ooh, it's impossible to single out one factor that really makes you who you are. I mean, I'll do my best to help you piece together things from... How about this? From a moment that you consider a turning point in your life, do you have an actual example that we can work with?
Oh, you mean the accident, of course. Pretty sure if I could point to one single moment, that was it. Cliche, but to be fair, I wouldn't have all the rest of this if not for that accident.
Yeah, I tend to agree. From what I'm gathering, you pretty much had to build your life around it. Okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being like abject failure, 10 being overwhelming success, how would you rate your life right now?
At this exact moment? 6.
6. Just to be clear, this is your scale, so we'll base everything on how you see, how you view, how you perceive it to be. Oh man, I'm bad at this.
That's perfectly fine, Doctor. You are not the first, nor will you be the last. And I know it's my scale, which is why I'm giving it the rating that I do.
Well, I get that you wouldn't rank yourself a perfect 10, but 6 is really an uncommon number to use. Like slightly above average, or like barely meeting your original expectations? Perhaps that's my projection, but...
No, you're in the ballpark. I know what I expect of myself. I know what others expect of me. I'm just setting the bar for future improvements. And if history has shown anything, it's that I'm good at passing bars. Sorry, lawyer humor.
I appreciate that. I'm curious. Setting the bar at that level may mean that you set it even higher in the past. So I get it. You come across as a realist, but what does that say about the idea that you won't reach your very first original lofty goal? Again, if I'm off the mark, just let me know.
I wouldn't say off the mark, but maybe not as clear as you could be. I've certainly failed before. It's not easy to get over, but I'd like to build to higher goals again in the future. I just don't necessarily know how to do that from an emotional standpoint. I know that I can't beat my feelings into submission.
Interesting. Tying that with this thing, I heard that you were called the man with no fear.
Fear? No. Sadness, anger, roller coaster of emotions? Yes.
Okay, I'm going to challenge that whole premise then. If you're aware of the roller coaster, yeah, you may not have the stereotypical shaking in your shoes or whatever, but you definitely had a fear reaction. We just don't have to classify it that way. You've had trauma.
Okay. So how do I make it right? How do I fix a mess that I didn't mean to create?
I get this a lot. Like, people want me to just tell them how to fix the past. Like, I don't have time travel abilities. And even if I did, I wouldn't use it to undo anything. That doesn't address how you naturally respond to current events going on. We'll have to figure this out together without making every thought or action sound like a possible mistake. I want you to be free. Like, no need to walk on eggshells around me to protect yourself.
Well, doctor, if there's one thing I've learned as an attorney, it's that dancing around an issue only distracts from finding the truth. You want the truth, you have to be willing to ask difficult questions. They always say rule number one as a lawyer when cross-examining is never ask a question to which you don't already know the answer. Well, the corollary to that is if you don't know the answer, you'd better be well prepared to hear it. If I have to work within, as you say, the familiar constructs, then I'd better be ready to address the facts as they are, not as I'd wish them to be.
All right, then. You're a straight shooter. I'll give you the facts as I see them. You're a man that's been scarred more than physically. You've been hurt more times than you originally first cared to admit. You tried different ways to cope with the idea that you were, in theory, set up to fail from the start, and yet you've managed to thrive, not just survive. I mean, I'm sure you're a man of many desires, but each time you think you overextend yourself, you tend to retool in a way that just dismantles your own system, and it makes you feel even worse. Is this too much?
Not at all. Frankly, it's perfectly in line with what I tend to think of myself. That's why I rated myself as a 6. It's just a matter of undoing so many years of self-destruction, both physically and mentally. My first instinct when faced with a problem is to fight, even if the enemy is myself.
Then I have an idea. I'm giving you a 7. It's automatically one higher than you think you deserve. And there's a reason for that. People like me are going to help you recognize that self-acceptance. No. Self-love is powerful. I'm not going to be a cheerleader, but I'll help you do what works for you. I'm game. We'll try it all. Meditation, deep breathing, visualization, journaling. We'll see what sticks. But I'm going to give my rating each session. You'll give yours. And we'll be able to cut back on the number of sessions or the frequency when my rating equals yours, because I think it's always going to be a little lower. Does that sound fair?
I detect a slight increase in your heart rate and a mild shallowness to your breathing. Is that nerves based on the notion that this idea might not work out like you hope?
Well, it may have started out like that. Now it's just kind of freaking me out that you can do that.
Sorry, it's second nature to me, and given how many other heroes you've spoken to, I assumed you were used to, well, whatever name you want to give to what I can do.
No, I may talk to heroes all the time, but the whole people using their powers thing, that never stops just being a little weird. You live in that world. I just get visitors from time to time. But back to the idea, you still never responded.
Sorry, I think that's a fair idea. And I can tell from your heart rate that you're sincere about it, which I appreciate.
I just told you.
That time was intentional.
Very funny. So do we have a deal?
I think we can make this work. So how many novenas do I need to say?
It's doctor issues, not father issues. And that's for the best for all of us.
I think I'll throw in a rosary for you, just in case. You know, I think there's a whole other what if comic. What if Dr. Issues became a priest?
Wow.
Father Issues. That's a whole other.
Okay, so
that's an alternate universe if ever I heard one.
Okay, so first off, I would not be Father Issues. I'd be Reverend Issues.
Yeah.
Second, I would gladly step into that role as long as I get to do certain typical things. Because y'all don't hear me now. If people could just stay with me for a moment and just listen to that voice inside, and you know where your heart lies, and you know where your wallet lies, and if you could just give me the time and dedication of your service right now, I would love for more donations to our Patreon. Thank you. Doors of the church are open.
Oh, God. We're about to have a bake sale to make money for this podcast.
Oh, boy.
Oh.
I'm telling you, genuinely, Anthony and I, we are good people. I swear to you, we're not heathens. I take that back. If I'm going to hell, I want to at least know that I did as much good in the world as I could, just so that they can, if they want to thumb their nose at me from heaven, that's okay. I'll stick my tongue out right back. It's all good.
I'd rather laugh with the sinners and cry with the saints, right? Oof. You were preacherifying for us. Brother Issues. Sister Odell would be proud. So that's going to wrap it up. So recommended reading. God, there's so many Daredevil stories. And I don't want to just be cliche and say, well, read Frank Miller. But having said that, the last hand of the Frank Miller story, and this involves the death of Elektra, who, again, I mean, we didn't even really barely mentioned Elektra at all, I think, in the background, just because I think she's a character. She is her own character, and I didn't want to define Matt by his relationship with Elektra, just as I don't want to define Elektra by her relationship with Matt. And so I said, let's just do Matt on its own. Maybe one day we'll get into the Daredevil Elektra relationship. That'll be a separate episode. Maybe one of these days he likes his thematic episodes. Maybe he'll cover that one. But I also want to throw in the Mark Waid run, because I feel that, and I said that's in the background, it's a little lighter in tone, and I feel like it balances out some of the Frank Miller stuff. Not that there isn't emotion in the Mark Waid stuff, but it's done with a little more levity, a little more color. And like I said, I just think it's a good counterbalance. So the Last Hand and the Mark Waid run. But really anything, God, again, you could throw a dart at Daredevil stories and hit a good one. He's one of those characters that by and large seems to just attract good quality writers time after time after time. And as someone who admittedly has not read a lot of Daredevil over the years, historically speaking, every story that I have read tends to be on the very well done side. So I would encourage you to go on Comixology or Marvel Unlimited, read up on Matt. You're bound to find a good story there somewhere, regardless of, like I said, regardless of who you're reading from. So next episodes, Eeyore from Winnie the Pooh, as requested by Brian. And then Reader from The Inhumans is requested by Ruby. And then Matt coming in with his character pick for Uatu the Watcher. That one is going to be a hoot and a half. That one's, I'm trying to figure out which of the what story we're going to go with for the recommended reading there. He's
Oh, man.
probably Galactus, I would say. If you have to
Yeah.
go with the Nuatu story, it's got to be
Yeah.
the
that works.
Galactus, the original Fantastic Four. But anyway, we'll get to that in a couple of weeks when we touch on Uatu. Last, want to give a quick review read. Brie Poe Benjamin on iTunes. This podcast is too real, analyzing superheroes like an everyday person. I love what you did. So thank you very much. Appreciate the love. And you can check out more reviews and leave a review if you're so inclined on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser or Stitcher. So go to Capes on the Couch, or find Capes on the Couch wherever you are, wherever platform you're listening to, and leave us a 5-star rating and review. Let us know, and we will read it out on the air and give you a little shout out. And as we say, if you email us at capesonthecouch@gmail.com with a screen cap of your review, we'll send you a sticker as a way to say thank you so much, because we appreciate that. And lastly, we'll just plug the socials real quick: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at Capes on the Couch. We've got a fan community on Facebook, and we also have our Discord, which is growing day by day, bit by bit, piece by piece, and getting some good, fun discussions and conversations going on in those groups. And as we said, our website is capesonthecouch.live, email address capesonthecouch@gmail.com, and our Patreon, patreon.com/capesonthecouch. Doc, anything you want to say before we head out? You want to leave us with a sermon?
No, that's okay. I know all of you have your busy lives to go back to, so just do us a favor and, don't tempt the devil, but dare to be great.
There it is. For Doc Issues, I'm Anthony Sitko. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Capes on the Couch podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Dr. Issues is a psychiatrist, but he is not your psychiatrist and does not have knowledge of your individual situation. For any personal mental health concerns, please consult your own healthcare providers. For medical emergencies, please call 911 or the designated number in your area immediately. Remember that you are not alone and help is out there.